Given that we know a lot of the heavy lifting was done, painfully over many rounds of negotiations over the TPP, are you optimistic, notwithstanding issues over autos in particular, that we could come to a pretty quick conclusion on these trade talks?
Well, I think any trade negotiation is going to take a certain amount of time, but the two countries, of course, have already negotiated a considerable amount in preparing for what would have been U.S. participation in the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. So we think there's a lot of groundwork that's already been laid. And then, of course, the U.S. has negotiated the USMCA agreement with Canada and Mexico to replace NAFTA. And there's a lot of very important content from a business perspective in that. So a lot of work has been done. And I think the two leaders, from everything we've seen, including that joint statement you mentioned, seem to have charted a course here. So hopefully, as a trade negotiation, this thing can proceed relatively quickly.
How much concern do you have that the wild card really remains the issue over auto parts and automobiles? And I guess what other parts of the Japanese economy do you think that ultimate agreement should be focusing on?
Well, we think there are several urgent issues. One of them clearly is agriculture. U.S. farmers are under considerable pressure at the moment, and getting equivalent access to what their European and some of their Asian and Pacific counterparts are able to offer in the Japanese market would be very important from a tariffs point of view. Then, as you say, there's the auto issue. Our chamber would like to see the Japanese government adopt the same standards that the U.S. government uses here, so we can export cars more efficiently and at lower costs directly to Japan from the U.S. And then lastly, there's the pharmaceutical pricing issue, which is going to have a major impact on one of the most important U.S. Goods exports to Japan, which is pharmaceuticals, unless the two governments can come to an understanding about a more positive approach.
So who are you speaking to in Japan and the U.S. to drive momentum for the trade talks?
Well, the ACCJ, the American Chamber of Commerce in Japan, has just had a visit to Washington where we brought a large CEO-level team from our companies in Japan to Washington to talk with senior administration officials as well as leaders on Capitol Hill to lay out our vision of what this trade agreement could look like and what it would mean for American business. And in essence, what we're looking for is a comprehensive agreement that would cover not only those three critical issues I just mentioned, but also point the way to the future so that the two countries and the businesses in those two countries can begin to plan for a business environment that clearly is going to be changing very, very rapidly in the coming years as digital technology influences an increasing number of industries.
When it comes to China, U.S. lawmakers have been pretty wary. Whether it's the Democrats or Republicans, there seems to be consensus about China not engaging in fair trade. What's the view in Washington when it comes to Japan?
Well, I think Japan has become our strongest partner in Asia, has been, of course, for many decades now. I think our cooperation with Japan is absolutely critical to moving the international trade situation toward a better one for American workers and for American businesses. So we regard Japan as a strong ally, and I think most people in Washington do too. Of course, there are some issues we want to work out, but I think that this trade agreement could and should be a forward-looking one. And if we can set some high standards in a lot of critical areas, such as how data is managed across our two economies, then we can have some really important influence, we think, over how the rest of the Asia-Pacific region evolves in the trade area.
Christopher, how detrimental has all of the uncertainty over a U.S.-China trade war, the flow-on effect to some of these, trade-vulnerable economies, including the likes of Japan, as well as the uncertainty over its own bilateral trade deal with the U.S. How much of that has been damaging, do you think, to investor sentiment, animal spirits, capital spending amongst your membership?
Well, I think if you look at the markets, you'd probably see some somewhat contradictory results. But I think it's clear that from Japan and sitting in Tokyo, what you see is exports to China, particularly in the machine goods area, have been declining in recent months. And that clearly is having something of a dampening impact. I think it's fair to say that the debates that are going on between the U.S., the negotiations, I should say, going on between the U.S. and China are going to be very important. The sooner those get resolved in a positive way, I think the better for everybody. But I think fundamentally, Japan and we see pretty much eye to eye on what we need to do to strengthen the rules in the international trading system.
Right now, Finance Minister Taro Aso speaking in Tokyo, saying that he has no comment when it comes to that currency clause after the economy minister said that the finance ministers had agreed on something when it comes to FX. We'll have to keep watching that one. But Christopher, how happy would your members be if you get something similar to what the U.S. agreed to on the TPP?
Well, we think the TPP set a very good standard in a number of areas. And we'd certainly like to see this forthcoming, we hope, trade agreement between the U.S. and Japan incorporate many of the key elements that were negotiated there. But as I said earlier, since then, the U.S. has negotiated with Canada and Mexico and really improved upon some of the aspects of TPP in several areas. And so we think that the incorporating some of that experience into the negotiation with Japan probably would end up giving us a stronger agreement that would help business in both economies. And as you know, Japan, meanwhile, has also gone ahead with a new free trade agreement with the European Union. And so we certainly need to take a look at that and hopefully see that U.S. exporters are able to compete on a level playing field with those from Europe as well.